we're here for Go Team. Some guy who's not here for Go Team, our guy Evander over in Portland. Another very fun story for some of us, very sad for others. After the scheduling debacle of Vancouver's supposed to be home play-in game, they traveled to Portland and absolutely dog walked them 5-0 in their own backyard. After the game, Portland MLS MVP candidate Evander took to Twitter to express his frustrations, including the calling out of an ownership group and apologizing to the fans. He goes out to say that the Portland fans do not deserve the people who have power over the club, those who say they are men but do not keep their word, those who are only there for when the team wins, a scathing review of the team's best from the team's best player, which stems from his lack of trust in the ownership group who have fallen short on promises to pay him in a new contract. So the question is, should he have gone public?
I don't have a problem with it, honestly. I mean, I
Interesting.
think, well, so the thing I was going to ask you, and I think you already answered it, was the part about where he mentions, do not keep their word, like what exactly that meant. But it sounds like based off what you were saying, it's in regards to getting him a new contract. But I mean, I'm here for it. I'm fine with him going public on it. I mean, it's good to see somebody on his level, that being an MVP finalist, speaking out against higher ups who may not be necessarily pulling their weight in this situation. And we don't know I don't think we fully know the behind the scenes. So I can't say exactly like what it means when he says do not keep their word. Even if it is in regards to a contract, like what exactly that means in terms of like timing, money, like was there even an offer on the table, whatnot, all of that stuff. So take my opinion with a grain of salt because obviously it's MLS. We never know fully what all these things are going on. But if he's upset with the way that things have been run in the what's it considered, like the upper management, higher office, whatever, then I think it's good for him to speak his mind on that, especially if he's echoing a sentiment that's maybe shared between other players on the team. He's someone who he can kind of get away with this more than like the third string goalkeeper if he was doing the same thing. Because if the team is like, all right, we don't like how you handled this, we're just gonna get rid of you, cut your contract, and let you go. They're just shooting themselves in the foot here. Like he's an MVP finalist. Like he's got some like he's got a foothold in this team for him, enough of a foothold in the team for him to like be able to come out and publicly talk about these things and just kind of like reading through the Twitter thread and also on Reddit, it seemed like Portland fans really liked his message. I'm sure some of that is recent frustration with the way that play-in game had gone, but I mean I feel like if Evander is getting the support that he is, then I feel like maybe he's justified in the way that he's feeling if the fans feel the same way as well.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I personally don't like taking my problems to Twitter, especially after like a big moment like that. Now I've done that once or twice, but I also am just complaining about the Red Bull being the Red Bull, and nobody cares about what I have to say anyway. But I think that it could have done Evander some good to hold off and cool off before saying something like that. We usually, in the soccer world, at least where I come from, have the 24-hour rule. Like if you have problems with what the coach did or whatever he did, you wait 24 hours to even, to talk about it or to share it with somebody, whatever, and then we go forward and chat about it. And from what it sounds like, based off of reports, is that he got his anger out as well. He got into it with Ned Grabavoy at the end of the game. In the locker room, he claimed that the loss was on him for not building the team right and all this stuff. But I get that you're understand. I get and I understand that you're frustrated with the loss and you're frustrated because your contract isn't there. And you mentioned the fans seem to be behind him. And at the end of the day, you got walked 5-0 on your home pitch by your rivals. And this wasn't an inner Miami team, right? They're one spot ahead of you in the table, and you're even on points. You guys are the same level, and they showed up and you didn't. Could the team have been built better? Sure. But pretending like Portland didn't just go out and spend big money on backline pieces like Miller and Crepeau just for them to ship a ton of goals, or to pretend that you didn't drop 8 figures on a striker that dropped 16 goals in 29 games for you this year is silly. Vancouver have only spent an extra $2 million on salary over Portland this year. And they're both at the bottom half of salary when you get to San Diego make 30 teams. This isn't like Miami spent 4 times what you've spent and they kicked crap out of you. Your rival showed up and you didn't. So I think for him to come out and just blame the front office for their inability to perform is tough. I think it's a stretch. Like I'm not saying like that's exactly like I'm not saying he's just it's not me, it's them, but to go out and throw them under the bus like that when they quite clearly spent good money to try and build this team, I think it's uncalled for, personally.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to like it's a little tough to figure out because I feel like maybe there's more behind the scenes of like what exactly led to this point because it's not like this just happened all of a sudden. It obviously it kind of built up to this point where eventually it boiled over and this frustration came out. But I think it is now. I mean, I don't know if you count the play-in game as technically making the playoffs, but
Hmm.
making the playoffs proper. It's the third season in a row now that they haven't made it. So at some point, you kind of got to look above the player level and start saying, like, maybe there is an issue somewhere higher up in the team that just isn't getting addressed. Because, I mean, like, 3 straight years missing the playoffs for Portland is like unheard of. I mean, this team before that point was just constantly, consistently one of the better Western Conference teams and constantly in the playoffs. And it seems they've shifted very quickly away from that. And it's very drastically away from that as well.
Yeah, there's definitely more that goes into this that we don't know, but um, it just you know, and he does, right? I was the reason I wasn't looking at the screen because I was rereading the thread, and he does. He takes it on his shoulder, and um, it was me. I could have done better, um, but also tossing that in there is something. I don't know. I just it felt like that wasn't needed. All he had to do is come out and say, "Yeah, that's on me. I could have done better," and just move on. Right? You didn't need to do that because you got it out. You got it out in the locker room. You got it out behind closed doors. You really didn't. Honestly, now that I'm reading it again, I don't. He really didn't take any accountability for it at all. Right? I want to apologize to the fans on a Wednesday night. Dropped everything to support us. Really hard to lose the way we did. Losing is not in our plans, but we have to deal with it. The players and the entire staff did everything we could to take Portland as far as possible. However, sometimes we have no control over what happens, and what happens on the field reflects, or what happens off the field reflects on the field. Portland do not deserve the people who have power over the club, like we talked about. Unfortunately, these are the things we have no control over. I have always fought and will continue to fight to put this team on top. To the fans, you deserve much more. Thank you for your unconditional support. We'll see you next season. That to me is, now that I've reread that a little bit closer, I hate all of that. Not once did you go up and say, "Hey, we didn't perform well enough. We didn't step up and do our job well enough." It was always we couldn't do it because we weren't allowed to do it. And I think that's not true at all.
It's I would be very interested to see what other teammates have to say on this. I think if they back to what Evander said, I think it adds validity to the way that he feels, and it probably opens the door to there is issues higher up in the team. But if people are quiet about it and not really like echoing his feeling on the blame higher up, maybe that's more of a just an Evander thing, in which case I would be more on board with the way you feel, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm fine with what he said. Maybe he could have waited a little bit longer to say it instead of so quickly after that game. But why don't you fill us in on how and I don't know if we have responses from the other players on the team, but what about you know Neville and Grabavoy? What did they have to say on this?
Yeah, listen, right. The next day, those two did respond, and they did very professionally, right? They came out and they expressed their disappointment with his decision and with his actions, and they're not mad enough to kick him out the door, probably because he's kind of good, but they are disappointed in his actions. Do you agree with that? Do you agree that they are, um, that is the right way to go about it? Should they be sending him off? What's the deal? What do you feel?
Like you mean selling him? Is that what you mean by sending him off?
Sell him, suspend him, anything like that.
I feel like the way the fans are responding to this, you would be digging yourself into a bigger hole if you sold him. I mean, maybe you can get away with a short suspension at the start of next year because people might just kind of forget about it. But I I think if you sold him, fans would be very upset about that. I mean, they seem to love him. People seem to be very on board with the way that he has been like outspokenly critical of the of Grabavoy and other upper management people. So I think selling him would be probably the wrong move. But at the same time, I mean, this may be like you may have slashed this relationship too much to the point where you can't recover it. And then at that point, it's like, are you doing more damage to just keep him around? Or do you have to just kind of let him go at that point? I'm kind of on the fence. I'm not too sure how to go about it, but I'm leaning more towards it would be worse to sell him. Not to mention he's an MVP finalist. Like he's like on the field, he is a great player.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I agree with the way with their feelings, and I was impressed with how they handled it. And Tommy Scoop said it best, right? They very easily could have gone up there and just said, "Yeah, this is a closed matter behind closed doors, and we're not going to comment on it," and ask something else. But they didn't. They handled it well. They played it down, like they should have, and they moved on, right? I like the way they did that. They both kind of got their shot out there, for lack of a better term. He took his shot at them. They came out and responded. It's water on the bridge. They move on. But I do agree that this might be writing on the wall that Evander wants out. It may not be that they want to get him out, but he might be trying to force his way out, which I think is a little unfair to Portland because based off of what I was reading, they offered him a new deal. They offered to make him a top 15 paid player in the league, a contract worthy of an MVP finalist, and he turned it down and said he couldn't trust them anymore. I don't know. Looking on outside looking in, it feels like he's just trying to force his way out. I'm not saying he doesn't love the city and doesn't love the club. I mean, the passion's clearly there, but I'm wondering if there's something that I have skimmed over I don't know about that hasn't really come to light, and he's now looking for other options.
I was actually just scrolling through the Reddit because on that same topic, someone had made a post in there about how apparently Evander wanted to move to Flamengo and the Timbers rejected it. If
Mm,
that is the case, that could be a part of it as well, I'm sure. And maybe to your point, maybe this is his way of trying to force that move.
yeah, yeah, and again, I think that's tough. But if you don't want to be here, you don't want to be here. Sure, it's just that's a tough way to do it because they were going to pay you really good money. So.
Yeah, for sure.